This is Child Development 202, 205. We're talking about Chapter 11, Physical and Health Disabilities, which is brilliant. Let's see what we have in the chat here. Yes. Oh, yeah. MDD. Okay, muscular dystrophy. Okay. We were talking about muscular dystrophy and ALS. Ironically, ALS is one of the only, what do they call it? Disorders that affects men only. It's interesting. And so now he defied everybody's expectations of him. And so I did put a video in the lecture and in the module about giving you a little story about him. They also did like a motion picture about his life. It was amazing. And so there's a lot of really cool things that just to watch that movie, to see that happen to him. Little things like when they said that they had to sever his vocal cord so he could breathe, he could live. And they said, you're never going to talk again. That was a very hard decision. And then the computer, the computer didn't sound like him. It sounded like a computer, and it was American. So he not only was unable to talk, but he lost his British accent. And so it's things like that you don't even think about. And again, he came up with theories that built on every theoretical physics, properties that we had ever known, built on Newton. Again, came up with some postulates that have never been thought about before. But so yeah, he has a book called like the Theory of Everything. Pretty amazing. So again, a lot of things that people with disabilities can do to surprise us. Again, like I mentioned earlier, I do believe that we have a societal or even a humanistic bias that if our eyes see something, it automatically connects into something else. So meaning like, oh, if he's in a wheelchair, he has a low IQ, or if he's in a wheelchair, he doesn't have any friends, or if if she's in a wheelchair, then she must blah, blah, blah. Like, we don't know these people's existence, but we do tend to connect those two things together. And it's an unfortunate thing when we underestimate people. So yes, this is the book walkthrough. So we're just going to read together. Like every chapters, they kind of give you a little overview here. We're going to describe a physical and health disabilities. There are two different categories. That's why they say physical and health disabilities. Physical has to do with the physical body, and health has to do with our health. So like right now, I have like some allergy things going on, but if this was like severe asthma and I couldn't breathe and I couldn't sit in the classroom, that's a health disability. But if I got in a car accident and I broke my leg and I had to be in a wheelchair, that's a physical disability. And we'll talk more about that. Special educations, how do we accommodate these people when a lot of times it's just their body, but not their brain, right? People in situations, we talk about the history and some people like Sir Stephen Hawking. And future perspectives, there are some really amazing technology out there for disabilities. I mean, like standing wheelchairs, people who can't use their legs, but they have like almost like robots that help them walk. It's almost like we're living the future, like right this second. It's amazing. These are the things we're going to learn here. We're going to define physical and health disabilities. We're going to talk about the different types. I look at this as like two categories, and you'll see the graphics in here that do look like two categories are beautiful. It kind of keeps it separate if you think about one is our physical body and one is our actual health. Okay. Characteristics, what those things look like, and how common they are, and where do we educate students like that. So again, health is the basics for everything. If you're not healthy, you can't really learn, right? And looking and, just basic doctor checkups keeps things moving, right? Do you guys remember we had to get our eyes and ears checked at school, right? And then in like middle school, it was like, no, thank you. Oh my gosh. Sorry. In middle school, they checked for scoliosis, maybe 6th grade. And so things like that, we have to keep up on the health stuff, because at the very least, if your eyes aren't working, your ears aren't working, you can't breathe. Even right now with my allergies, I've lost a little bit of hearing in here. And even with a basic cold, not even the flu, we're not even talking about COVID, a child sitting in the classroom is going to miss the words if they have their ears kind of plugged up, or if they have an itchy throat, or if their stomach's upset, or things like that. So again, IDEA is put in place to make sure that kids are learning in the classroom, right? And we have to connect with the parents and medical professionals to make sure that at least the health stuff is clear. Good. Okay, so then we look here about So IDEA, now we have two different situations in physical health. We talked about this day one on the different categories. So now we're talking about, in this one chapter, we have two categories, which is a little weird, a little different. So one chapter has two categories, right? So first we talk about orthopedic impairment. That is a physical disability. We have a missing finger, a missing hand, a missing arm, a missing full arm. Same with the feet and the legs. There could be something wrong with the spine. There could be something wrong with the face, right? So this means a severe orthopedic impairment that adversely affects a child's educational performance. If you're missing fingers or you don't have fingers on any hands, how are you going to write? Okay. So again, this terms includes impairment caused by a congenital anomaly, meaning as they're being born, caused by disease like polio, right? That's still around. Tuberculosis, but that's in the bone tuberculosis, and impairments from other causes like CP, amputations, fractures, or burns that cause contractures, meaning like you can't move your hands or your muscles the way. Contractures just mean something's frozen. And then OHI, remember what's under OHI?
The health impairment.
Yeah, it's called other health impairment. But remember, we put chapter 7 under OHI.
ADHD?
Yes. There's not a category for ADHD, but ADHD into here. So when we go back to chapter 7, you'll see OHI show up there too. See, that's why it's confusing. I think ADHD should have its own category, right? But think about it, this is why it's in here. And this is why, this is the definition. We're going to get to it right now. Having limited strength, vitality, or alertness. That is exactly why it's there, including a heightened alertness to environmental stimuli. My son would walk into my classroom and say, the lights are too loud. Thank God he wasn't learning in my classroom. Or he would say, you know, those fancy light switches that have like a square and like a motion sensor, and there's like a little tiny red light on there. He's like, that alarm is flashing. I'm like, oh no, buddy, that's just giving us an idea where that light switch is. I mean, he was hyper vigilant in the room. He could tell me if my ceiling fan in the next room is squeaking. Yeah. I even have like different sport modes on my car, like, you know, mud and dirt and sport and eco or whatever. And he's like, oh, this one sounds different. Hyper vigilant. So if you're trying to learn something, but you're getting all this stuff in your sensory bombardment, it's hard, right? So look at this, alertness, heightened alertness to environmental stimuli that results in limited alertness to the educational environment. Meaning if this other stuff is bombarding you, you can't focus. That's why ADHD is in there. However, they include asthma, ADHD, ADD, and ADHD. We'll talk about what that is different in chapter 7. Diabetes, right? Because if their sugar's off, they're going to feel crummy, right? Epilepsy, a heart condition, hemophilia, that's a blood disorder. We'll talk about that soon. Lead poisoning, this is one of those things in the environment we can avoid. We talked about that in ID. Leukemia, cancer of the blood. Nephritis, I'm not exactly sure. I think that might be like itis is inflammation, and I think it's of the nerves. Nephritis is nerves, or maybe that's, let me look that up. Maybe that's kidneys. Yeah, inflammation of the kidneys, yes. Rheumatic fever, that's an old one. Sickle cell anemia, that's a blood disorder where your blood cells, instead of being round donuts, they're like a moon, like a sickle. And Tourette syndrome is the shouting out one, shout, 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 shout. And then anyone, no matter what it is, it has to adversely affect educational performance. We will see this phrase in IDEA in every single definition. Look at that right there, and appearance right here. This one says adversely affects a child's educational. That's the one phrase you'll see every single time. Now, again, we're going to talk about orthopedic impairments first. Orthopedic means the actual physical disabilities. Orthopedic is kind of like, I think that's what we would say medically, or like a doctor, think about the body, right? Orthopedic, a movement in the body, physical disabilities, okay? And again, this young man, he's in the hospital. He could have anything going on right now. We can't tell. He may have just had an amputation from a leg. He could have cancer. He could have, it doesn't matter. We don't know. But we'll talk at some point about teachers in hospitals too, which is really cool. Because they can't always attend school. Some children have to take school to the hospital. And so like Orange Unified works very closely with CHOC. Yeah, we have teachers in the school. And you, instead of having a classroom, you are the teacher that goes to each room, or you have maybe 6 students who can come to your small room. It's really kind of cool. And again, it has to be severe and has to affect educational performance adversely. So like, for example, I slipped and fell about 20 years ago and I froze this joint. You know, like all old people have like one weird crooked finger, and that's me. But is this going to affect my educational performance? No, not at all. I mean, like, that's my writing hand, but it doesn't mean that I can't do my work. But again, it has to be something that's severe and affects educational performances adversely. And again, so again, with physical disabilities, it must meet 3 criteria. Limited strength. You could have somebody who has issues and you can't sustain the school day, right? They just can't make it through the whole day for whatever reason. And alertness. Maybe they have narcolepsy and they're falling asleep. Maybe there's other circulation issues where they're not getting right. They don't have enough oxygen in their blood, like sickle cell anemia. That happens a lot. Chronic means forever usually, and acute means severe health problems. So like say, like I'm getting older in my knees, I call them, I have popcorn knees, but they don't hurt me unless I'm like bending down and bending back up. But again, if I was sitting in a classroom and not feeling it, it doesn't matter, right? It has to be something that if I have to write with a pencil, my hand cramps up and my whole arm freezes, and then I lose, you know, vitality or consciousness, or I have a seizure, whatever. We have to talk about those things, yeah. And it again, always it has to affect education performance adversely. Meaning, if it was like an X-Men thing and you made your educational performance better, they wouldn't address it either. It has to be something that lowers your ability to learn. Now, again, we don't say somebody, oh, that kid's sickly. We say medically fragile. That's meaning like, you guys know there's always somebody at school who was like always sick all the time, right? I have a friend of mine whose daughter, my friend, she grew up in South Central and she wanted to provide a better life for her daughter. So she moved to Tustin, and she got a job at a bank. She's doing good, single mom, whatever. Her daughter has severe asthma. And so like they'd be getting ready for school and her daughter would have an asthma attack. And in order for her to maybe she moved to Orange and she worked at Tustin. As a parent, you can have your child close to your place of work. That's okay. And so what it was is that you have to apply for a transfer. No, I think she lived in Westminster. She had to apply for a transfer to have her in a school close to her work. And because she was absent so many times, or late to school, not even absent, late to school so many times, because of her asthma would kick up on the way to school, they said, well, we won't approve your transfer. And I said, oh no. Or she was in the school for 1 year and then they said, no, we're not going to approve that transfer for the next year because of her chronic tardiness. I said, oh, no. She is protected under the federal law, under IDEA, that you cannot discriminate against a child who is late to school based on their disability. And then she would have to leave school early sometimes because she couldn't control her asthma. She had all the medicine, she was connected to the nurse, all that stuff. And then she'd have to leave early. And well, she has excessive absences or half days or whatever like that. You cannot discriminate against a child who has something that was made, it's inside their body, right? She didn't like eat lead and get asthma. It wasn't that, right? And it's still not the child's fault, right? So, oh yeah, I said, here, contact my lawyer. 1 letter later, she's back in the school. I was like, don't mess with me. Do not mess with anybody like that. So now we get to talk about physical and health disabilities. I told you 2 categories, right? Under one, so look at this one, physical and health. So physical is its one category. Health should be on the same page right here. I think I did put that in the lecture, I put them side by side. So now we're just talking about the actual physical body, mobility, walking, moving, hands, feet, arms, anything, neuromotor impairments. Now, again, one category breaks into 2. So now we talk about neuromotor, right? That has to do with your brain connecting to your body to make it work. And it doesn't work properly. That is a neuromotor impairment. So epilepsy, we all have a little bit of a example with epilepsy. It's kind of like storm in the brain, and it affects different parts of the body in different ways. Cerebral palsy, same thing. It has to do with the brain connecting to the nerves that move your body. And CP is diagnosed at birth too. It's great. Epilepsy can sometimes show up a little bit later. Spinal cord disorders like spina bifida, or if their spinal cord is messed up in any way. And again, this isn't from a car accident. It can be, but a lot of times these things happen when people are just born. Muscular dystrophy, same thing, that happens to young children. That is in the lecture as well. There's a video in there too. Polio, rare, but still around. And then MS, multiple sclerosis, that shows up sometimes a little bit later. So that is your brain and your body not communicating effectively, right? Next one is muscular skeletal conditions. So arthritis, so muscles and bones. That's it. The clue is right in the words. Neuromotor and muscular skeletal conditions. So juvenile arthritis, that does happen. Limb deficiencies, meaning less of a finger, less of a hand, less of an arm, right? I even had a student who had one longer arm than the other. It's called brachial palsy. I can't really tell. I didn't even notice it till she said it. She was like on the softball team and everything. And she's really just was able to just adapt. It was fantastic. And skeletal disorder. So that could be scoliosis. That could be Marfan syndrome, like super tall. They have like funky bones. It could be somebody who's hunched over, things like that. So again, this is the physical disabilities. You would see this in the physical body in some way, okay? Arthritis, you'll see like maybe large joints and things like that. And then OHI, again, we talked about this, but we kind of put this in here too. This is now health disabilities, chronic illnesses. When you have asthma, it can go away, but hardly. It just sometimes just gets less. Sometimes asthma is like worse, less, in different types of your life or different types of the year. Blood disorders, again, that could be sickle cell anemia, that could be hemophilia, things like that. We'll talk more about that. Childhood cancer, that is a blood disorder. Congenital heart defects, a murmur, anything like that. Cystic fibrosis, that is one where your lungs are kind of underdeveloped and they don't really live past 30. Diabetes and sickle cell anemia. Infectious diseases, this is things that we would try to keep away from each other. And I bet you in the next version of this book, they will put like viruses like COVID, SARS-CoV-19. So hepatitis B, that is a blood issue that sits in your liver, actually kind of slowly destroys your liver. Your liver is like your garbage man. Could you imagine never taking the garbage out? Oof, it'll pile up and then people could die from Hep B. Hep C is in there too. But there's a lot of medicines that are helping with us too. So HIV and AIDS. And if you're thinking what child has HIV and AIDS, I worked in the HIV community for 5 years, and yeah, there's plenty of kids with HIV and their parents never told them. Let me say that again. Plenty of kids with HIV and their parents never told them. Now, there's a really interesting side note. A child can be born with HIV, can be born positive, HIV positive, and then actually convert to negative about 18 months later. It's very rare, but it's possible, right? But here's the thing. If you're in the classroom and you're like, oh my gosh, I'm telling you right now, there are going to be parents who never tell the teacher. It happens all the time. Trust me on this one. They rip off the stuff on the bottles and say, this is the medicine this child needs to take. They don't tell the school, and there's a lot of different things. Or they give the kid the medicine before school and after school, things like that. Storage infections are very rare. That's an acronym for different types of infections. Some of them can happen during birth. Sometimes when kids eat dirt, you can get infections from that kind of stuff. And TB, tuberculosis, very rare, but still happens. Again, that's a lung disorder. So this is not very common here, not at all. But here's the thing. If you're working with kids, you always take universal precautions. You always put on gloves and maybe a mask. Yeah, I'm telling you, I worked in the HIV community and I changed bandages. I'm fine. I don't have HIV. But again, it's interesting because these things are in our society. We just don't always think that they can affect the educational performance. But yeah, cystic fibrosis, this is a person who's going to have a cough forever. And they tend to be a little bit smaller and things like that. It's interesting. So I can tell you, so asthma, that could be inherited, blood disorders, genetic, cancer can just show up out of the blue. Heart defects, again, you can get from your family. Cystic fibrosis is a recessive gene that you pass on. Diabetes, same thing, that could be family. Sickle cell anemia is definitely family, genetic. Hep B, you can get from the environment. You can get from a dirty drinking fountain. HIV, AIDS, very hard to get from the environment. Just as a note, the HIV virus lives about 30 seconds outside the body. So if somebody had HIV and they bled on something, that virus would die in 30 seconds. So that makes COVID like 10 times more like communicable. Hep B, the virus can live outside the body for 30 days. So people always like, oh my God, AIDS. Listen, trust me, that is not our biggest concern anymore. It really isn't. It really isn't. But we've come up with the antivirals for HIV and AIDS and Hep B and COVID. I took the antivirals, which were partially HIV innocence, which is really interesting. So again, that's part of the future and end of this chapter, right? So characteristics, are there common characteristics? Yes and no. They're unique. So like if you say we have three students with seizure disorder, they're going to look totally different. There's different types of seizures. Same thing with cerebral palsy. You can have a very severe case of CP, or you can have a mild case of CP. One of the videos I put in the module has a girl who just says the CP, it just affects my ankles only. And she's like so sweet and everything, but she's going to have it forever, right? Sickle cell disease is when your red blood cells look like a half moon. What happens is they get kind of bunched up in your capillaries, and the half moon parts are sharp. So they can cause pain, they can things like that. And so that's kind of hard. And then diabetes, that's a hard road there too. There could be type 1 or type 2. Type 1 is what you're born with, type 2 is what you get. But a child that has to take like read their blood sugar and take insulin, it's hard, all right? Again, CP, we learned about that, type 1, type 2. Yeah, so good. There's a lot of stuff in here. But again, that's why this class is so important, because it just introduces you to all these different things. So when you're in the classroom or you have a child in your family, your learning is like 10 times, 1,000 times bigger in the moment. This book gives you a foundation, but in the moment you learn so much more. You learn from other parents, other professionals, and things like that. Prevalence and placement. Oof. So it says, is it possible to determine the exact prevalence for each condition? No. They kind of overlap, and then again, let's go back one. If I have a student, let me go back here. If I have a student with epilepsy, but they also have ADHD, they might be categorized with ADHD first, or epilepsy and autism. They may be categorized as autism first, or they're epileptic, but they have very low language skills. So maybe they're in speech and language disorders first. So sometimes the overlap keeps it from us. So we could have, again, a kid who's typically developed who just gets cancer out of the blue. That happens, right? You can have a gifted kid with diabetes. Absolutely. You can have, let's see, a child with, let's see, what have we talked about already? An intellectual disability with asthma. So it's really kind of hard to pinpoint exactly who is what and where. But again, we are servicing students based on the needs that they have in the moment. It's hard. If we have the information, we can move around categorically, but the focus is supporting the child in what they need in the moment, right? So this could be a girl who has diabetes. This could be a girl who has asthma. This could be a girl who's having emotional stuff like a panic attack. They happen. She's probably what, 10? Panic attacks can happen at 10, anxiety, things like that. We'll learn about with emotional things too. So again, all health conditions, right? So again, look at back to the SBSK YouTube channel, the Special Books by Special Kids. Unbelievable. So here's the estimated prevalence, meaning we have an idea of this is what it's like. So estimated prevalence in US children, 8%. Oof, most common chronic condition among children. If I said, why do students miss the most school? The answer is asthma. Then the common cold. Asthma, 100%. And that is a huge number. Look at compared to the rest. 1/4%, 1/3%, 2/100%. Asthma, huge. Yeah, way bigger than type. What is that? That's 1, 2. That is 16 times, no, 24 times larger than diabetes, type 1 diabetes. And that's what kids are born with. You know, I can tell you our air is not what it used to be, right? Actually, in some ways it's better, in some ways it's not. But epilepsy kills kids who have seizures, right? By the way, if you have one seizure, it's an event. If you have two, it's epilepsy. Because one could be for some reason, could be like a medication or something. But if it's two, that means that there's something else there, like a disorder. Cerebral palsy, CP, that's very uncommon, but again, I'm telling you, I have a friend who with CP, it never worsens over time. He's kind of slurry. She kind of walks funny, and she's like, oh yeah, people think I'm drunk all the time. It's fantastic. She's kind of funny. Sickle cell disease is a genetic disorder. It's screened at birth and then requires careful medical management. That's a big one. And then there's things like hemophilia that's in there too, but we'll talk more about that. But again, these kids, most of them, over half, are in their neighborhood schools. But again, intellectual disability, not so well. But physical, no problem. We'll throw you in the classroom. Sometimes in the special education environment, you're monitoring their blood sugar. Whoa, wow, did it logged me out? Oh, let's go back. Here we go. Bookshelf. Okay, maybe it's gonna block me out. Okay, let's hold on. They're like, you've been reading too long. Oh no, oh no. Okay, so here we go. We're in 11. Let's see, how did we get? Yeah, let's keep going. Okay, oh wait, we didn't get quite to early intervention. Okay, let's do, I think this is where we were. Okay, prevalence and placement. Most kids are in the general ed classroom, which is not a problem. That's perfect, that's lovely. But then sometimes they just have to step out and either go home or go to the nurse's office, and that's fine. That can happen in the gen ed classroom. We want students to be in the least restrictive environment. That's the law. Put them with their most typically developed peers, okay? And I know it's noon, so if you guys need to go, I get it. I'm just gonna keep recording and post, okay? So again, this learning outcome, again, we talk about challenges and their solutions, accommodations, early intervention, health emergencies, and related services. So look at this right here. If he has, let's say he's got CP, meaning like his body's all intact. We see his hands. I'm assuming he's got his feet. This is like a walking walker, probably has wheels on the bottom. He probably just has a stagger walk, but with all these supports, he can walk, right? But maybe his brain is with his typically developed peers. He's in the right math, he's in the right English, he's doing all kinds of stuff. And look at this, looks like it's a park around maybe houses. So yeah, I should be able to hang out at a park just like every kid, right? And so let's keep going. Okay, so I like these parts when it talks about the challenges and their solutions. So the general characteristics are physical limitations. Again, it could be hands, arms, feet, like ear, like even missing an ear, things like that. So impaired motor functioning, right? If they can't walk right or talk right or hold a pencil right. Poor general health. Sometimes there are students who are medically fragile like this, and then episodic health crises. Every once in a while, it just all comes at once, and then these kids are out of school for a couple of weeks, and then they get better and come back. That's hard too, because how do you keep up? Maybe you can keep them in the hospital, maybe you can't, right? Challenges: mobility, walking, moving, speech sometimes is an issue, access to things. Again, because if you can't walk or just holding a door open for yourself and walking through it might be a challenge. Fatigue, it's hard, right? Participation, if they can't participate like other kids, that's a hard too. And absenteeism. These are some of the challenges that kids like this are facing. And again, the adults here to help, those are challenges for us too. I can't help you learn earth science if you're not in the class, right? So are there ways? Yes, it says right here, are there ways that teachers can help? Yes, Section 504 says the availability of accommodations. However, they have to remember that not all students receive those services. So sometimes a student has been doing fine without accommodations and modifications. Maybe it's just like they have a messed up hand, but they can still write. But after they get to a certain age and maybe they're getting older, but their hand is now causing more problem because it's not growing in the same way their body is, maybe sometimes the IEP or the 504 comes later. Excuse me, distance education is a fancy term for online learning, just like you guys are doing. Communities of practice is kind of like study groups. And then bookshare.org. Oh, that's a great idea. I'm gonna look up that right real quick. Bookshare.org. I want to see if any of our books are on there. Not right this second, but that just gives me a bookmark to go back to. Sometimes flexible schedules, sometimes kids are great in the morning, but in the afternoon they have to take a nap. Well, great, we'll work on that. I had ABA sessions in people's homes, and the kids would be like, I come home from school and I have a snack and then I want to take a nap. And I'm like, you need to reschedule me because that kid needs to sleep, right? Happened to my kid the other day. He's in session and he's like yawning. She leaves, he goes to bed. I was like, okay. Word processing software. Sometimes, as long as you can touch it with a knuckle or even a tool, that works. Service animals, we've seen a lot more service animals lately, and they can do all these things like grab me a book or help me cross the street or let us know when there's a seizure coming. The cat will come on the lap or the dog starts doing circles and things like that. So I've never seen a service monkey. I think that would be a handful, but they can do more things than a dog, really. Well, maybe not. We'll see. So this is how a 504 and the accommodations and modifications are sort of calculated, like here. So again, we talked about presentation, setting, response, and scheduling. So again, if this person has a hard time writing, we get note takers, or we have the notes written for them, or we give them audio notes, right? Digital text, so they can read their book on here, like again, Bookshare. Positioning, like a book stand, or put them close to the teacher. Securing materials to the work area. Maybe sometimes they're spastic a little bit and then the book falls. So we do like Velcro or like rubber bands or something like that. Or sometimes they want to write and they just have to have a little bit of help. They get a little device that helps them hold the pencil or the pen. Accessible location, again, all federal law under Americans with Disabilities Act said that every classroom has to have the proper egress. Even here in my office, the door has to be the certain width. I can't have anything on the wall that a wheelchair could come into. Even the exit sign here is in Braille. Like I can't have certain things in certain places. Anything in this office has to be accessible by wheelchair. All the light switches have to be accessible by wheelchair. Even the door handles are not even like this. They're just the push bars, things like that though. So again, Americans with Disabilities Act, every public or especially federally funded or state funded building has to be ADA compliant. Accessible workstation. We have people here or even the classroom desks that they're adjustable and we can put students with wheelchairs around there. Distance education, we talked about that. It's this right here. So here, think about these accommodations and modifications, how they help even us. That's that universal design for life. Working with a peer or in a group. Sometimes you can put like a more advanced student to, scaffold the earlier learner. That to respond, they can sometimes just verbally say it, but maybe they're not verbal or they're having a hard time typing that day, right? You can have a scribe. That's a person who scribes for you. My son has scribe and note takers on his IEP, but he doesn't want people to take notes for him because he's embarrassed, but he certainly wants me to scribe for him. That's for dang sure. It's like, oh my God. So that's typing too. Computer word prediction software. I don't really know what that is, or that's just audio voice to text, but it kind of like fills in the blank for you. Scheduling and timing, that's extended time breaks, flexible schedule, shorter assignments. Again, when Peyton was in a kinder or first, they would say he has to finish 50% of the worksheet at 80% accurate. I was like, oh, thank you, but that's hard. How do you pick which numbers and how, you know what I'm saying? So if there's 10, there's a 20 on a page, 50% would be 10, and then 80% would be 8 out of 10 accurate. So how do we pick 8 on this shoot? It was hard. That was hard. And we only used that for a year and that ended up not being great. So reducing barriers, again, hazards, barriers, nothing. See, look right here. This kid is going to be right in here in the middle area. I see this one. She's still kind of checking him out. She's good. My son would be the one, if he saw somebody in a wheelchair, he'd be like, oh, it's not fair. I want wheels. And so again, flexible seating arrangements, just treating that child like he's like every other child, but just giving him the supports that he needs. So he's wearing glasses, so he may need to be closer to the board. And maybe if he has to grab a binder, he can't grab it off here, but she has it down here for him, things like that. Or the door handles, maybe maybe there's a handle there, but maybe it's got an automatic push button. We don't know. So things like that. So putting stuff in an appropriate height would help. And right, looks like it's a pretty good backpack. He's got a lot of stuff in there. Again, large. I have a student who came in a wheelchair. Oh, by the way, she was a typically developed child, and she did like a weird somersault off the couch and basically not broke her neck, but like something happened in her neck. And so she basically lost her ability to use her arms and legs, and everything started withering. So yeah, so she could barely write and things like that, but she was totally fine until she was like 10. Ooh, wild, huh? Okay. Can diseases and conditions be identified early? Sometimes, yes. There's newborn screenings. You can find out things like cerebral palsy or the sickle cell anemia. Not always diabetes, not necessarily a seizure disorder, but again, you can find PKU, sickle cell, all these cystic fibrosis, toxoplasmosis, things like even kids can get like herpes and things like that being born to a mother with herpes. So things like that. So there's a lot of, it says right here, 30 metabolic disorders can now be identified from blood panels. Yeah. So just taking, what they do is they prick the heel of the child, and they could just take a little bit of blood and they could figure out right there if there's issues right there, which is great, because sometimes, so PKU is phenylkeratinosis, and what that is that there's this protein in the body. If it's exposed to certain things, it can create a intellectual disability. Have you ever seen like on Diet Coke on the bottom, it says warning, contains phenylalanine, may cause PKU? Yeah, that's what that is. So phenylalanine is a type of a amino acid-ish that if you give diet soda to a child, which people do, it can actually create this almost cascade effect in the body that creates a neurological disorder for the rest of their life. Yeah, it's really wild. And again, how many times did that happen before we figured it out? Ugh, right? So what is the role of newborn screening? Yes, we need to figure things out, but there's also false positives. So you always go back and do a follow-up. So I had a student even who had a brand new baby, and she was doing the ear check. You can do the ear check. We talked about that, how to screen for kids. And sometimes you just don't get the right result. And she freaked out. I was like, no, you just go back in 90 days. You're gonna be okay. Your baby will be then 3.5 months old. We'll be okay. We're still on the early intervention. You're fine. You're fine. But the earlier you can help, the early, see, there's like they had their heel prick. The earlier you can get in there, the better it is for everything, right? Look at that, you're so sweet. Yeah, I'll never forget Peyton's first, because he was in NICU for 6 weeks, and then I got him in San Bernardino, and I got him home, took him to Kaiser so they could meet their ready patient. They did the heel prick in labs, and then I walked over to check in with the doctor, and they didn't get that Band-Aid on there really good. So he bled all down me. I was like, new mom, I'm about to pass out, but there's this weird thing, like as a mom, you just step it up. It's weird. I thought, oh my gosh, I'm never going to make it. And then you just do. You just do. Teachers have a role in caring and helping students in medical emergency. Yes. This is a weird kind of issue, because I've told you up to this point, doctors are not teachers and teachers are not doctors, right? However, sometimes there's training for teachers to learn how to do EpiPens or do diabetes checks, or we do general precautions for seizure disorder, because you don't know. Because there could be a student who's never had a seizure at all, and at 15, boom, they're having a seizure. There's a video in the module there with that too. Again, the individual healthcare plan, usually when there's more medical stuff, it's a full IEP. But if it's just a few things, and it's just a 504. And again, I have multiple videos in here about seizure disorder, so watch those. Again, sometimes they're absent seizures where the child is like, and then they just come back. That could be a seizure. There's one where the eyes just kind of do a little bit of an earthquake and they come back. Sometimes there's like somebody starts talking weird and then they come back. Yeah. So there's different types. There's different types of things. So again, here, absent seizure, sometimes they don't even realize that they're zoned out. Simple partial, sometimes they're just sitting there and they can have like moments like where there's a partial seizure. So they're just there and they might just have like this little thing, this little shaking the one little arm, and then it stops. There's drop seizures. I've seen this ones where it's like they drop like this. I had a child who had 150 of these a day. I've seen the eye jumping ones. I put a lot of that stuff in the videos in the module. Complex partial seizures. Sometimes they'll have a couple of things. It looks like sleepwalking. The funny thing is that these things, even though they might look very minimal, they are exhausting. So you'll see this tonic clonic. This is the one that's like in the movies where they're laid out and they're shaking, and then they're like it's a big, this is the big one. But again, even these small ones can make a child very, very exhausted. This big one, yeah, sometimes they have to go home because it's almost like using every muscle and every nerve in your body at the same time. It's a lot, right? And so again, I put a lot of videos in there because a lot of people are scared of seizures. But I think we can handle these things. And that whole wives' tale, like put something leather in their mouth, they don't bite their tongue. Nope, we just roll them to their side. We just provide space for them. Sometimes they need water, sometimes they need a blanket after. It's just caring for a person. There's another brain disorder where sometimes I think what's it called? It starts with a P. I forget what it is. And I've had like a couple students with this where if you stand up too fast, you lose consciousness. If you could just be doing nothing and lose consciousness. I was in our mail room a couple years ago, and there's a student in there just like doing stuff in the mailbox. Boom, she hit the ground. I was like, I come over to the staff member. She passed out. Is this normal? And she goes, oh yeah. Sarah has this thing with her brain. So all we do is we call campus security, and they walked in and she had sat up. I just sat with her. She was breathing. She was fine. She almost looked peaceful. Her feet were twitching a little bit. I was like, oh, she looks fine. Then she like kind of woke up, and then I was like, are you okay? And she's like, yeah, I'm fine. Sat her up. She just sat there for a while, and then the security guards came in and, hey, Sarah, how's it going? And she's like, oh yeah, I'm good. It was like something that just happens out of the blue. I want to say it's like P. It's called, starts with a P. But a couple of ex students with this, and it's just like, it's kind of like a fight or flight thing that shows up every once in a while. And right, I've passed out after an eye exam and my feet were twitching, and they're like, oh, is she having a seizure? No, I remember having like dreams. It was like the best sleep ever. It was fantastic, but you never know. Could have been a seizure. I don't know. My brain's kind of funky. But again, you have school nurses who are on the team. You have case managers sometimes are on the team. Those are the case managers called something different in most districts. But yeah, PT, OT, again, speech. So for him, he may have like cerebral palsy, like just in his legs. His upper looks fine, And so they look at all these gym equipment and things like that. So again, you might have to have them have different, supports during the day, or again, different chairs and things like that. So again, he has to be able to walk. He can't be tripping over even carpet to wood or wood to carpet, things like that. Let's talk more about related services. It really, again, depends. Like we've talked about in every chapter, you meet one kid with CP or one kid with epilepsy or one kid with asthma. They're all different. Again, origins history, as long as humans have been on the planet, we have had differences in our bodies, right? But here's this thing: American society holds values that like physical perfection with desirability. So we think, oh, if you're disabled, you're not important. That is not true, but those kids can actually feel left out or isolated. I like how our society is like embracing nerds and stuff like that. So I think we're seeing more disabilities in our society, more people, more movies about it, more, again, social awareness about it and things like that. Have the treatment of people, you're going to see this in every chapter. Has the treatment of people with physical and health disabilities been fair and just across time? No, we used to, again, lock them up and throw away the key. It was not great. We used to have leper colonies, right? If people, yeah, we would call them court jesters. What about the Hunchback? Disney made a movie about it, but it was like those people were just like, right? And so it's interesting. What is the role of people with disabilities in their civil rights? We talked about this in the 60s when there was the civil rights movement. We had to wait until the 70s we talked about Judy Heumann, and we talked about how they fought for disability rights. Again, look at this. Western medicine, because of scientific discipline, Western medicine. Disability, we needed to hide that in the 40s, but that's when polio was big. Yeah. Campaign to eradicate polio. Ed Roberts starts a disability rights movement. We didn't learn a lot about him. He's in the chapter 1 of our book. He's a quadriplegic, and he wanted to go to he wanted to go to Berkeley, and they're like, well, you can't come to Berkeley. He's like, watch me. He didn't graduate it. Civil rights to people with disabilities, 1990 to 2010. And then she did this piece here for extends rights for disabilities worldwide. It was just beautiful. So again, look at that. There has to be an elevator everywhere. Look at that. And sometimes it's only down 5 steps, but it needs to happen. That's the Americans with Disabilities Act right there. Again, we talked about universal design for architecture and then universal design for learning too in chapter 2. Okay, we talk more about that. But look at these. Look at a lot of these things help us. These rocker switches are great for people who don't have fingers, right? Or they can just do it with an elbow. How many times have we done it with elbow? This is adaptive. This is adaptive. This is adaptive. It's fantastic. Even at the Main Place Mall, there's like a wheelchair bathroom, but it's also like a family bathroom. And then there's a radio in there. You can ask for help. Like there's a person. Hole in the Wall gang. Oh my God. This makes me so happy and like makes my heart so full. But it is almost time and I don't want to like go there. Watch the videos I put in the module for the Hole in the Wall gang and all the camps for kids. I seriously would love to work there. We talked about movies. Look at this is actual gargoyle on the Library of Congress, National Cathedral, right? Darth Vader joins the other gargoyles that serve as drain pipes to keep water away from the stone walls of the cathedral. Talk about disabilities. He had multiple disabilities and he had adaptive things to help him still try to rule the world. Right? So it's more common in our society than ever before, but can we prevent some of these things? Yeah, sometimes, but sometimes no. How do we prevent asthma? Well, if there's a genetic component too, we can't really do that. There's scientists who are talking about that. Here, so we have Special Olympics. Look at dogs with prosthetics. If you do have an actual book that talks about, let's see if it's in there. I think they did take it out. Okay, so on that last picture, when I talked about this, there was a caption here about the guy who, like the South African runner who was like, whatever, winning all the races and then like murdered his girlfriend. So I think they took that out. I was like, thank you. So again, preventions, accidents and disease. Can the incidents be reduced? Yes, we have accident prevention. We have things like hand washing. We have vaccines. We have different things that can help. But again, motor vehicle accidents, we can, let's say a child like lost a leg in an accident. Well, we have all these different things, but still, even with those, we could still have accidents that do cause physical impairments. Infections and diseases, yes, we have vaccinations, but vaccinations just get us used to that, to fight it off. Doesn't mean it's gonna do everything, right? And then frequent hand washing, disposable gloves, good hygiene, masks. By the way, in our windy season, wear a mask. Trust me on this one. That's why we all have allergies, because we stopped wearing masks. Diving in water accidents. I have a friend from high school, her son dove into a pool at a birthday party, snapped his neck, and he's been a quadriplegic ever since. And I think it was like, he did it when he's 10, he's like 25 now. It's a big deal. She's taken him to China for services. It's like, there's a lot that you have in that. And then he has an older brother who's typically developed and a younger sister who's typically developed. It's really, really tough. Diving safety and swimming safety, we have to teach kids about that one too. And again, these causes of asthma, yeah, we can reduce allergens, but I have a friend who, she has an asthma attack every time she has the red dye 5. It's in everything, it's hard. Gunshot wounds, yes, don't have a gun, or if you do, know how to lock it up and keep it away. I grew up with guns in my house, there was never an issue ever. Poisoning and toxins, safe storage, like yes, even for our adoption, I had to have all my medications in a box locked. Not like, but it's way up there. Kids can climb. Yeah. First aid kits, sports injuries, this use headgear, protective equipment, like everything. Premature birth, get your prenatal care, access healthcare, don't drink, right? Child abuse, there's all kinds of support for child abuse, and then HIV. Again, you can get, they didn't even say breast milk care. You can get HIV from breast milk too. So there are some things that we can do to lessen these effects or support these effects. Look at this guy. One of the videos I put in the module was a guy who made a Lego prosthetic arm. It's really cool. And look at this guy. He's like all about it. So cool. There's some really cool things coming up in the future. Again, different types of wheelchairs, different types of, yeah, we have RoboCop and Bionic Woman for television shows. So again, this ReWalk is a powered exoskeleton. it's so, yeah, this is so cool. I mean, there's so many cool things out there right now. Summaries. So we have physical and health disabilities. They have, we'll talk about ADHD in chapter 7, but that's still under OHI. How and where we educate these kids and how we can avoid some of these things and how we can advocate for some of these things. And there we are. Oof, that's a lot. So who do I have left? Yeah, that's tough.